So it's been a little bit of time since we really talked about college football. So we figured, we go ahead and talk about the current landscape in college football and give a little bit of recap of what's going on. So at the top, of course, Alabama's still number one. We talked about their victory in the first game of the season against Miami. They go on to beat Mercer. They also beat Southern Miss last week. And then the closest that they've come to being defeated is against Florida. And they are very close to losing that game. But for the most part, I still think Alabama is the cream of the crop in college football right now.
Yeah, I mean, I know they play people like Mercer who and Southern Miss who are not really known for being great, but they did survive that Florida game. They killed Miami when people thought that Miami would be putting up a fight. And just looking at the way that team is built and how they play, they are definitely like the team. I don't see them dropping below number one this season, and they will probably be the champions unless something drastic happens. So we move to Georgia, who's number two. They're also 4-0. They beat Clemson that first week, as we talked about, kind of in depth, and Clemson kind of gave them their hardest fight, which doesn't really mean much. Then they beat UAB, they beat South Carolina, and they beat Vanderbilt. Really, really strong defense. They've got a interesting matchup coming this week as they play the on fire Arkansas. We'll get into that in a little bit. So this is a good team. I kind of think Georgia will also sit kind of nice and pretty at number two unless something big happens. All right, but they have definitely kind of set themselves up as being the Georgia that we're used to seeing a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they have a pretty big test against Arkansas this week. Arkansas is on the up right now, but I still think Georgia will get the win. And barring some crazy thing happening, I don't see Georgia losing another game this season. Once you get to SEC title game against Alabama, then that's a whole different situation. But until then, I don't really see them losing a game. So I think both of these teams, if they continue playing the way they are, both of them will be in the playoffs regardless of who wins the SEC title game. Because if you're Georgia and you lose to number one Alabama by like a touchdown or something, the committee's not going to kick you out for that. I mean, you definitely still deserve to be in the playoffs. So either way, no matter how that game would turn out, if it does happen, I think both teams would still make it to the playoff. Now we go down to the 3, 4, and 5 spots. We got Oregon. Their big victory this year was obviously Ohio State. We covered that a little bit 2 weeks ago. They're still riding the wave right now. They're looking good at 4-0. Then you got Penn State at 4-0 as well as Iowa. So Pac-12 and the Big Ten, they're representing pretty big here in the top five. So yeah, I have to give them respect. Penn State, they got that victory against Auburn week before this past Saturday, and Iowa, their big victories. Of course, the rivals Iowa State and Indiana, they're looking good as well. So props to them.
Yeah, when Iowa and Iowa State met, they were both ranked. I think they were like 9 and 10 against each other. Iowa is now number 5, and Iowa State is no longer in the top 25. So big changes there. Oklahoma, number 6, sitting at 4-0. 4-0 is great, but they do look pretty unimpressive this year. We covered their kind of clawing away from defeat against Tulane that first week. Western Carolina is Western Carolina. That doesn't really count. They beat them like 76-0. That I mean, that's Western. Nebraska, they kind of handled. When they come against West Virginia and they win by 3, and it's a very close game that shouldn't be very close. And they just have not looked like the team they could be. This is, oh my God, my bad, something fell. But this does not look like the Oklahoma team that we're used to seeing here. Spencer Rattler is doing okay, but he's definitely not what people thought he would be. And I'm not seeing an Oklahoma playoff berth this year, if I'm being honest.
Well, it kind of depends on how things go because at some point I feel like Oregon, Penn State, or Iowa would lose during the season before they would get to the Big Ten championship game. And it pretty much just seems like at this point, all Oklahoma has to do to get into the playoff is at least not have more than 2 losses against pretty good teams and then win the Big 12. And considering that we've seen a lot of other top teams already lose, if Oklahoma can possibly scrape by, they can get that fourth spot. But yeah, they haven't looked very impressive at all. I mean, they very well could have lost to Tulane, and they very well could have lost to West Virginia winning on a field goal. Obviously, Nebraska is kind of a mess right now, to say the least. And Western Carolina, that's their throwaway game, week 2, not really a big deal. So I don't expect them to really miss the playoffs if they continue winning, no matter how they do it. But you never know with Oklahoma. Now, Arkansas, we mentioned this earlier. No, it's been a while since we've seen Arkansas be really good at football. And now they are at number 8. They do have a matchup against Georgia this weekend. That's going to be a big game in the SEC. People are wondering, like, heck, is Arkansas for real? And they've beaten Texas, who's supposedly supposed to be back. I don't know if Texas is ever coming back. They beat Rice, they beat Georgia Southern, and they just got a victory against A&M 20-10 this past weekend. I don't think Arkansas is going to be like competing for the title or anything, but you have to give Arkansas a whole lot of respect for how they've been able to play this season.
Yeah, Texas is not back, but I think Arkansas actually might be coming back, or at least in the process of doing so. I think they won't be competing for the title, but they're definitely looking pretty good. And I would also say that if they lose to Georgia, as long as they don't get like absolutely murdered, that they could probably stay about where they are in the rankings. I don't think they should drop too much for losing to that team, and I'm hoping it's a close game. Now, Ohio State is not the Ohio State we've been seeing for the past 2 years. They are currently number 11, and they are 3-1. They beat Minnesota, and then they beat two kind of throwaway teams, Tulsa and Akron, and then they lose that big game to Oregon, which props Oregon up and drops Ohio State down. Ohio State probably could recover from this, maybe, but most likely not. As Terrence kind of explained, with like Oklahoma climbing up, and they could, as long as they skate by, they can survive. And then teams like Alabama and Georgia are probably going to sit nice up there. So I'm not sure Ohio State is going to be able to pull out of this one, but yeah, they definitely don't look terrible. They just haven't looked amazing.
Yeah, I mean, they beat the dog crap out of Akron. 60 points to 7 after Akron got that first touchdown. I bet people were going crazy, like, oh, is Akron about to upset Ohio State here? Um, but yeah, I mean, it's Akron, so it's not like the hugest deal there. I think the difference between them and Oklahoma is obviously the fact that Ohio State's already lost a game. Oklahoma,
Yep.
if Oklahoma had lost to West Virginia, then I think Oklahoma would have dropped a whole lot because I think people have already lost a whole lot of respect for them, um, just because of their constant unimpressive play at certain points. I mean, once you do this every year, you go 12-2, win your title game, and then get thrashed in the playoff. People are kind of just more annoyed with Oklahoma. Ohio State didn't look super impressive against Minnesota. You lose to Oregon. I think they can climb back up. It really is just contingent on them winning for the rest of the season, and then obviously you win that Big Ten championship game. We'll kind of see how things turn out. So obviously, those Big Ten teams that are in the top, 12, they're gonna have to beat up on each other at some point or another. So a lot of things might happen in between now and then. You might have some upsets for Penn State and Iowa. We'll just have to see. Now, another team that has definitely fallen from grace is the Clemson Tigers. Now, we covered that first week against Georgia where they looked unimpressive, at least on the offensive side of the ball. They looked good on defense. They only allowed 3 points. And then you beat the heck out of SC State. You have a game where you almost lose to Georgia Tech, but you pull out in the end, and then you lose to NC State this past weekend. They fall all the way to 25, and defense is looking good for the most part. They were great for this first 3 games, and they were mostly good against NC State until later on. But the offense is just looking kind of atrocious to say the least. And Clemson is definitely out of the playoffs this time.
Yeah, I'm not going to get full into the game breakdown, but it's definitely this team has flares of offensive production, like that first drive against NC State. Then they do things like the last drive where like Justin Ross puts in no effort for a touchdown pass that could win the game. So it's just this team's very rocky. They're 2-2. This is not going to be a playoff year. I'm not even sure if they'll end up staying in the top 25, depending on how things keep going. We know that Clemson has been kind of sitting nice and pretty in the top 25 for a while now. But yeah, this might be one of the first years in a while that they stay in it. They also have a like 30 something game home win streak, and they play Boston College this weekend at home. Boston College, not exactly an amazing team, but neither is NC State. So we'll see how that goes for them. NC State, by the way, is now number 23. They are above Clemson. They're 3-1. They beat South Florida, Furman, and Clemson. Obviously, the big thing for them is beating Clemson. Their loss is to Mississippi State.
Yeah, just one last thing about Clemson. They would have had a path to the playoffs actually had they not lost. Because
Yep.
even that week one loss, I mean, they looked horrible on offense, but their defense was pretty good. So if you just win the rest of your games for this season, I would say, all right, your one loss is against Georgia. They were probably going to end up number two. You can kind of make a case for them as ACC champions to be in with only one loss to a Georgia team like that. But now in this scenario, I don't really see how they could get in unless a lot of those top teams lose not once but twice, and their losses have to be a lot more unimpressive compared to their loss against NC State. So it's not like it's the end of the world for Clemson, but you definitely are disappointed if you're a Clemson fan because obviously you lose Trevor Lawrence, but DJ looked pretty good last year. So you're thinking, all right, you can just come back in and keep it going. But again, it's not the end of the world. They just need to at least win the rest of their games for this season, and we'll see how things turn out going forward. Now,
Yeah.
for the last little bit here, we just want to talk about the matchups this week. We got a lot of big matchups, mainly three that we want to mention. Arkansas and Georgia, we got an 8-2 game. Cincinnati and Notre Dame, 7-9. And then Ole Miss takes on Alabama. Of course, Alabama being number 1 and Ole Miss being number 12.
Yeah, I think the most exciting matchup here is probably going to be that Arkansas versus Georgia game. Of course, the closest matchup should be Cincy versus Notre Dame. But for Arkansas and Georgia, this is going to be the big test for both of them. Can Georgia hold on and be as good as they've been being? And can Arkansas kind of keep that fire rolling and see if they can improve and take down that Georgia team? And I think beating that Georgia team, it would be a huge accomplishment for them, and they would probably jump pretty far. Now, will I think that happens? Or do I think that will happen? Probably not. But I don't think it's like impossible. So we'll see how that goes. And then Ole Miss versus Alabama. I don't think it'll be a terrible game, but I think we all know who's going to win that one.
I would like to think this would be a closer game between Alabama and Ole Miss. I mean, at one point, about 5-6 years ago, this was a pretty darn good matchup. You had Ole Miss beating Alabama 2 times in a row when Alabama was still a top team, of course, as they have been for a decade now. And then Alabama came back and got a little bit of revenge in the third straight meeting. But I don't know. I think after they narrowly escaped Florida, I think Alabama's kind of like, all right, we're not going to mess around with these SEC rivals here. We need to just go in, take them out. As long as they don't lose, they shouldn't have a problem making it to the playoffs anyway. But you still want to look very impressive. And I know Nick Saban is definitely not the type of guy that is going to be like, we only won by 7 points. That's great. Like, nah, he's going to be pissed if they just win by a touchdown. So I expect to see Alabama on full force against Ole Miss, and they should get the victory.